The morning sun drifted lazily over the quiet streets of Westwood Pines, illuminating manicured lawns and perfectly trimmed hedges, the kind of suburb where uniformity wasn't just encouraged, it was practically worshipped. Keanu Reeves stepped outside to enjoy a peaceful start to his day, coffee in hand, expecting nothing more dramatic than a bird chirping or a neighbor waving hello. But instead, taped to his front door like an accusation was a thick, crumpled HOA envelope with bold red words scribbled across it, "Urgent, odor violation." Keanu stopped mid-step, staring at it with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Odor violation. His home. He hadn't done anything unusual. He peeled the envelope off slowly, feeling the weight of what was inside, as if someone had stuffed frustration and pettiness into a stack of papers. Inside, the pages were covered in large font warnings and aggressive bullet points. The first line nearly made him laugh out loud. "Your home has been reported multiple times for releasing strong, exotic, foreign smells that disrupt neighborhood comfort." He blinked. Foreign smells. What did that even mean? He kept reading, eyebrows climbing higher with every sentence. Residents are concerned the scents may be related to prohibited activities. Another line read, "You must cease all cooking involving pungent spices." And the cherry on top, meals must comply with HOA-approved culinary guidelines. He sat down on the nearest chair on the porch, rubbing his forehead. Culinary guidelines. Were they serious? He wasn't running a restaurant. He had simply cooked his late mother's favorite recipe the night before, something comforting, familiar, warm. It wasn't exotic or strange. It was personal. Before he could finish absorbing the absurdity, the sharp clicking of heels echoed down the walkway. Mrs. Carmichael, the neighborhood's self-proclaimed guardian of rules and the HOA president, approached with a clipboard hugged tightly against her chest. She moved like a general entering a battlefield. Her steel-gray bob bounced with purpose, and her lips were pressed so firmly they had nearly disappeared. "Mr. Reeves," she said without even a polite greeting, "we've had 3 complaints about your cooking. 3. In the past 48 hours. Keanu looked at her incredulously. "I made dinner," he said slowly. "It's not illegal." She sniffed the air dramatically like a hound trying to detect danger. "There it is again," she said, pointing an accusatory finger toward his front door. "That strange, foreign, lemony smell." Keanu stared at her. "It's just roasted herbs," he said. "Garlic, lemon, rosemary." She gasped as if he had just admitted to international espionage. "Herbs," she repeated. "We can't have strong spices disrupting community harmony." She shoved a clipboard toward him, the pen dangling off the side like a weapon. "This is your official citation. You have 1 week to stop producing unapproved food odors, or the HOA will issue daily fines." Keanu took the clipboard, flipping through the pages of bureaucratic nonsense. It was surreal, a stranger telling him he couldn't cook inside his own home because someone found garlic offensive. He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Mrs. Carmichael, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm cooking meals. Normal meals." She narrowed her eyes. "Well, it doesn't smell normal to us." With that, she turned around and marched off with self-satisfied confidence, leaving him standing alone with a citation, a coffee gone cold, and a rising sense of irritation simmering beneath his usually calm demeanor. For the rest of the day, Keanu tried to brush the incident aside, but the feeling lingered like a mosquito buzzing near his ear. The complaint wasn't just about food. The phrasing, the tone, the passive-aggressive implications, they stung deeper than he expected. Words like foreign, exotic, and unapproved bounced around in his head. It didn't feel like a complaint. It felt like an accusation. He cooked his mother's recipes because they reminded him of her, the gentle sound of her chopping vegetables, the scent of lemon and herbs filling their small kitchen, the comfort of home after long days. These dishes weren't just meals. They were memories, pieces of his past, pieces of her. And now an HOA board wanted to regulate that, as if culture and identity were something that required permission. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, his mother's old recipe book open in front of him. The handwriting on the pages was faded but familiar, comforting. He traced his fingers along the notes she had scribbled in the margins. The ache in his chest grew heavier. "It's not just a smell," he whispered. "It's her." Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again. Too quiet, as if the air itself expected him to fall in line with their bland, flavorless version of life. But Keanu wasn't ready to give up the last piece of his mother he had. Not for an HOA, not for complaints, not for uniformity. As he closed the recipe book, determination replaced frustration. He wasn't looking for a fight, but he was no longer afraid of one either. Tomorrow, he knew, the situation would escalate. But he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't backing down. The HOA clubhouse was already buzzing when Keanu arrived the next morning. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching floating dust in a way that made the room feel almost theatrical. Fitting, considering the drama that was about to unfold. Folding chairs filled the space, arranged in tight rows like a courtroom gallery. Neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting between the projector screen and the entrance where Keanu now stood. He could immediately feel it. The tension, the curiosity, the judgment. On the projector, in bold letters, flashed the title, Odor Complaint Hearing, Reeves Residence. Keanu inhaled deeply. He had expected a conversation. Instead, he'd walked into a staged event. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, each member arranged like pieces on a chessboard. Mrs. Carmichael was positioned dead center, her expression self-satisfied and immovable. Beside her sat Mr. Douglas, the treasurer, a man who took himself far too seriously for someone whose primary duty involved sending out late-fee emails. On the other end was Helen Schmidt, the so-called culture monitor, a title she had given herself and the HOA inexplicably allowed. Helen's posture was rigid, her lips pursed as if she were holding in a perpetual complaint. As Keanu walked to the designated respondent chair, the room quieted. Mrs. Carmichael tapped her gavel with unnecessary theatrics. "We are now in session," she declared. Keanu fought back the urge to roll his eyes. Helen stood first, dramatically unfolding a stack of printed pages. "I reside 2 houses down from Mr. Reeves," she began, projecting her voice like she was auditioning for a play. "And for several evenings now, I have been subjected to disturbing smells." Murmurs rippled through the room. She continued, "These aromas are unusual, overly strong, and," she paused for effect, "distinctly foreign." Keanu felt a spark of irritation flicker inside him. He lifted a hand slightly. "Foreign isn't a flavor profile," he said. "Or a crime." Helen glared at him. "Well, when nobody else on this block cooks with such overpowering spices, it is concerning." A man in the back called out, "Maybe you just need to season your food." Laughter erupted, and Helen whirled around, scandalized. Mrs. Carmichael banged her gavel. "Order." Mr. Douglas cleared his throat importantly and shuffled his papers. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "do you admit that you produced strong aroma-heavy meals on Monday and Tuesday nights?" Keanu stared at him. "Aroma-heavy meals," he repeated. "I cooked dinner. Lemon, garlic, herbs. Nothing illegal, nothing strange." But instead of reassurance, his explanation only caused Helen to gasp again. "Garlic," she exclaimed. "I knew it." Her reaction was so exaggerated that a few people snickered. Mrs. Carmichael, ignoring the humor, leaned forward. "Our community values mild, neutral cooking. Casseroles, baked chicken, nothing that disrupts the olfactory balance." Keanu blinked slowly. "Olfactory balance." She nodded firmly. "We cannot have unusual scents spreading across property lines." Keanu felt the restraint in his jaw as he tried to remain calm. "Look," he said evenly, "I'm not hosting parties, I'm not causing damage, and I'm not disobeying any legitimate rule. I am cooking meals in my own home. Meals my mother used to make." The room fell silent for a moment. Some neighbors softened, recognizing the emotion behind his words. But Helen stepped forward with renewed determination. "But why does it smell like a foreign marketplace?" she demanded. "Why can't you cook something normal?" The word normal hit him like a slap. He met her eyes. "Because my mother wasn't from here. Her recipes aren't planned. They aren't meant to be." His voice wavered slightly but held strong. "They're part of her culture. Part of me." A brief hush swept through the room. Even a few board members shifted uncomfortably. But Mrs. Carmichael, unmoved, cleared her throat and leaned back in her chair with the air of someone who believed she was about to deliver a final, victorious blow. "Sentimentality aside," she said, "the HOA rules clearly allow us to regulate disturbances, including smells. Therefore, Mr. Reeves, we will require you to submit a weekly meal plan for HOA approval. All meals must follow our guidelines." The words hung in the air like smoke. Keanu felt his stomach drop. A weekly meal plan. Approval to cook in his own kitchen. It was absurd, insulting, and, more than anything, it felt like a violation of something deeply personal. The room held its breath, waiting for his reaction. Some neighbors looked away, uncomfortable with the clear overreach. Others leaned forward, enjoying the spectacle. Keanu, after a long moment, stood slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, voice calm but firm. "But that's not happening." Mrs. Carmichael's eyes widened. "Mr. Reeves, refusal to comply will result in fines." Keanu met her glare without flinching. "Then fine me." Gasps erupted. Mrs. Carmichael's jaw tightened. Helen clutched her papers dramatically. Mr. Douglas looked like he might faint. But Keanu didn't care anymore. He had reached his limit. As he walked out of the room, the whispers exploded behind him. And he knew he had just turned this small conflict into something much bigger. Something that was far from over. The next afternoon, Keanu sat quietly in his backyard, trying to let the tension settle. He brewed tea, hoping the calm scent of chamomile would help him breathe easier. But even the gentle aroma reminded him of the absurdity of being accused over smells. He stared at the fence that separated his yard from his neighbor's, a towering wooden barrier that suddenly felt symbolic. He had always loved the simplicity of this home. The quiet mornings, the privacy, the way his mother's recipes filled it with warmth. But now, for the first time, the air felt hostile, like the neighborhood itself was rejecting him. He tried to distract himself by chopping vegetables, preparing the same dish he'd made the night before the complaints began. As the lemon zest drifted into the air, a bittersweet ache hit him. Cooking was healing, and now even that was being inspected like a crime. The back gate suddenly creaked open. Keanu turned sharply, expecting another HOA official or maybe a neighbor ready to complain again. Instead, it was his friend Daniel Mercer, a renowned chef known across Los Angeles for his Michelin-starred fusion restaurant. Daniel lifted a hand casually. "Heard you're causing a culinary uprising in the suburbs," he joked. Keanu blinked in surprise. "How did you?" Daniel cut him off with a grin. "Half the city is talking about it. You know people love drama." He walked over to the cutting board and inhaled deeply. "That smell, wow. That's familiar." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Familiar how?" Daniel leaned in, sniffing again with exaggerated seriousness. "This is citrus herb marinade," he said confidently. "Mediterranean influence, but with subtle Asian notes. Very home style. Very nostalgic." Keanu blinked. "Exactly. My mother's recipe." Daniel's face softened instantly. "Ah," he said quietly, understanding more in one word than the entire HOA did in an entire hearing. Daniel grabbed a spoon, dipped it into the marinade, and tasted it. His eyes widened. "Keanu, do you know what this is?" Keanu laughed. "Lemon and garlic." Daniel shook his head. "No. This specific combination, this balance, I've tasted it only once before." Keanu frowned. "When?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Years ago, at a small, family-run street stall in Manila. The chef there made a marinade with the exact same flavor profile. It wasn't famous or commercial. It was personal. A family recipe passed down through generations." The words hit Keanu like a slow, heavy wave. His mother had been Filipino. She rarely talked about her childhood, but she always said her recipes came from home. Suddenly, the connection felt deeper than he ever realized. Keanu swallowed hard, his throat tight. So she brought this from her childhood. Daniel nodded. "I'd bet my career on it." He smiled gently. "And now the HOA wants to ban it because it's foreign." Anger flickered through Keanu's chest, not fiery, but deep and steady, like glowing embers. "They're not just attacking my cooking," he said quietly. They're attacking my mother's culture. Daniel nodded once. And that's why you can't just ignore this. This isn't about smell. This is about identity. Keanu looked down at his hands that had learned to chop vegetables because his mother taught him. Hands that had stirred this very marinade at her side as a kid. Hands that still, after all these years, trembled slightly when he missed her too much. I don't want to fight, he said softly. I never do. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Sometimes fights find you, and sometimes you have to rise to them. Especially when it's about something sacred. Keanu took a slow breath, letting the weight of the moment settle inside him. Daniel was right. This was bigger than a complaint, bigger than rules, bigger than one neighborhood's ignorance. Just then, a loud, accusatory voice pierced the calm afternoon. There it is again. Keanu and Daniel turned. Helen Schmidt was standing at her back fence, arms crossed, nostrils flaring like she was sniffing poison. That smell is back. This is exactly what we complained about. Her voice was shrill enough to make birds scatter from nearby trees. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. You're kidding, he muttered under his breath. Helen pointed her finger like she was accusing Keanu of arson. Whatever you're cooking needs to stop immediately. Daniel stepped forward before Keanu could respond. Ma'am, he said calmly, do you have any idea what you're smelling? Helen raised her chin. Something too strong for a respectable neighborhood. Daniel's expression shifted into something sharp, professional, and deadly serious. You're smelling a cultural family recipe. A dish older than this neighborhood. A dish made with love, history, and heritage. Helen blinked, thrown off by his tone. And, Daniel continued, I'm a Michelin-starred chef, and I'm telling you, this smell isn't a disturbance. It's a masterpiece. Helen's face froze. Her mouth opened and closed like she couldn't decide what to say. Daniel lowered his voice. You're not reacting to a smell. You're reacting to your own unfamiliarity. It was the politest way he could call her ignorant, and it landed perfectly. Helen sputtered, flustered, unable to come up with a response. For the first time since this nonsense began, Keanu felt a small, satisfying spark of hope. Someone understood. Someone was standing up for him. Someone was defending his mother's memory. And as Helen stomped away in defeat, Keanu realized something important. He wasn't in this fight alone anymore, and things were about to change. The next morning, Westwood Pines didn't wake up gently. It jolted awake like someone had pulled a fire alarm. Residents stepped outside, sniffing the air with suspicion, confusion, and, for the first time, curiosity. Keanu's backyard was quiet, but the scent drifting over the fences wasn't quiet at all. It was rich, warm, inviting. A perfect blend of garlic, lemon zest, pepper, caramelized onion, and something subtle and earthy that even seasoned cooks struggled to identify. The aroma wrapped around the block like a warm blanket, soft but undeniable. What nobody knew was that Keanu wasn't cooking at all. Daniel was. Inside the kitchen, Daniel moved like an artist at work. He whisked, stirred, chopped, and seared with elegant precision, recreating the exact dish that had triggered the HOA meltdown. If they want to complain, Daniel said, wiping his hands with a towel, then they need to understand what they're complaining about. Keanu stood beside him, watching the process unfold, feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness rise inside him. She would have loved this, he said quietly. Daniel looked up. Your mom. Keanu nodded. His eyes softened. She loved feeding people. She said food wasn't about taste, it was about memory. Daniel's movements slowed. Then let's give them a memory they won't forget. Outside, neighbors began gathering like a crowd forming before a street performance. Some followed the scent with eager curiosity. Others arrived with suspicion etched into their expressions, clutching HOA pamphlets as if ready for battle. And of course, at the center of it all stood Mrs. Carmichael and Helen, both wearing the same pinched, offended look. But today, something was different. They weren't confident. They weren't marching in with power. They were rattled. There it is again, Helen hissed, waving her hand dramatically through the air as if trying to fan the smell away. It's even stronger now. Mrs. Carmichael took a suspicious sniff. This is unacceptable. It borders on chemical. A teenager nearby laughed. Chemical. It smells like an actual restaurant for once. His mother elbowed him, though she looked like she agreed. Then came the moment that changed everything. Daniel stepped out the back door, carrying a steaming dish in his hands. The moment the crowd saw him, apron, chef's coat, confident stride, the murmuring exploded. People recognized him instantly. Someone shouted, "That's Daniel Mercer." Another whispered, "Isn't he the Michelin star guy?" Cameras came out. Phones lifted. Even the HOA board froze, caught completely off guard. Daniel approached the fence and raised the dish slightly, letting the fragrant steam curl into the air. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I hear there have been concerns about a certain smell." The line sent a ripple of laughter through the crowd. Keanu stepped beside him, hands in his pockets, calm but resolute. Mrs. Carmichael recovered first, pointing accusingly. "We have strict rules about odors." Daniel nodded. "Then it's a good thing I'm here to explain what you're smelling." Without waiting for permission, he placed the dish on a portable table, uncovered it fully, and let the scent bloom. "This," he said, "is a traditional Filipino lemon herb marinade passed down through generations. It's food rooted in family, resilience, and culture." The crowd leaned forward, intrigued. Daniel continued, "It is not exotic. It is not foreign. It is not disruptive. It is history." His words cut through the air sharper than any HOA rule ever could. Helen stepped forward, flustered. "But it's unusual." Daniel smiled calmly. "Unusual doesn't mean unwelcome." A few neighbors clapped. Keanu felt the moment like a wave washing over him. The support, the shift, the possibility that this conflict might finally reveal its true nature. Daniel turned toward the crowd. "If anyone would like to understand the smell instead of fear it, you're welcome to try." The invitation was simple, but its impact was explosive. People hesitated at first, glancing around as if waiting for someone else to move. Then an elderly neighbor named Mr. Patterson stepped forward. He was known for being grumpy, strict, and allergic to anything fun, but he took one bite. His eyes widened. "Good grief," he said. "This is incredible." Laughter erupted. A chain reaction followed. One by one, neighbors approached, sampling the dish, their expressions transforming from suspicion to surprise to delight. Even the teenager's mother tried it and said, "I need this recipe." Meanwhile, Mrs. Carmichael and Helen stood frozen, watching their carefully crafted narrative dissolve. Their authority, their complaints, their claims, all crumbling in real time. The more people tried the dish, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a disturbance. This wasn't an offense. This was community. This was culture. This was connection. And in that moment, the neighborhood realized the truth. The problem wasn't the smell. It was the prejudice behind the complaint. Keanu didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply watched with quiet gratitude. For the first time since this ordeal began, he felt the community shift. The walls around him, the literal fences, the metaphorical boundaries, the unspoken tensions, all seemed to loosen. And though the fight wasn't over yet, this was the moment that tipped the balance. The HOA wasn't just losing control. They were losing the story. The morning of the HOA hearing arrived with a strange mixture of tension and celebration floating in the air. Keanu woke early, the soft sunlight spilling across his kitchen counters as he finished preparing a small batch of the same aromatic dish that started all this. The fragrance rose slowly, gracefully, warm ginger, toasted sesame, wild herbs, and the subtle smoky sweetness from a Himalayan salt crystal. It filled his kitchen the same way it did when he was young, standing beside his grandmother as she cooked with quiet pride. Today, though, it wasn't just a meal. It was a message, a reminder of where he came from, and a symbol of everyone out there who felt pressured to hide their culture to fit into a tidy neighborhood rulebook. He packed a sealed container, straightened his shirt, and stepped outside, only to find dozens of neighbors waiting for him on the sidewalk. They weren't holding protest signs. They were holding food. One neighbor had a tray of homemade biryani. Another offered tamales. An elderly couple brought piragus. Someone waved a jar of kimchi. A little boy held out a bowl of pho bigger than his head. They weren't protesting the HOA. They were celebrating the diversity Keanu's dish had brought to light. If they want to ban aromas, one man joked, they're gonna have to find all of us. The laughter eased the tension, and people walked with Keanu down the street like it was a festival, not a hearing. Even the local news vans had returned. The story had exploded online overnight. The hashtag Let Food Be Home was trending globally. Keanu smiled softly but stayed humble, thanking everyone who stood with him. He wasn't fighting for attention, he was fighting for respect. Inside the HOA hall, however, the atmosphere was far from festive. The board members sat stiffly, stacks of paperwork in front of them. Mrs. Wilkins, the HOA president, tapped a pen impatiently as Keanu entered. She clearly wasn't expecting half the neighborhood to follow. "This is a formal hearing," she announced sharply. "Not a community potluck." But Chef Armand, invited as a witness, stepped forward before she could continue. He placed his hand on the sealed container Keanu carried. "Madam President," he said calmly, "this aroma you're calling disruptive is not a nuisance. It is culinary heritage. It's a recipe older than all of us, made with ingredients that represent entire traditions." Mrs. Wilkins tried to interject, but he continued, "To ban a scent is to ban a story, and we do not ban stories in good communities." Mrs. Wilkins shifted in her chair, suddenly less confident. "This isn't about culture," she insisted. "It's about maintaining uniform community standards." But the neighbors behind Keanu murmured, some shaking their heads. It was Keanu who stood up and spoke, calmly, without anger. "I understand rules," he said. "I follow them. But a home is more than paint colors and lawn measurements. A home is memory. It's where we honor the people who came before us. My grandmother cooked this dish every Sunday, and when she passed, it became the one thing that felt like her hand still on my shoulder. If the smell bothered someone, I apologize. Truly, but I won't apologize for remembering where I come from." Silence fell over the room, heavy, emotional, unplanned. Then Mrs. Patel rose from the neighbor section, the same woman who initially made the complaint. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I need to say something." Everyone turned. She held her purse close and took a shaky breath. "I'm the one who reported the smell. But it wasn't because it bothered me." She looked toward the floor. "It reminded me of my husband. He passed last year. He used to cook with the same herbs. And when I smelled it, I wasn't ready." The room softened instantly. Keanu stepped closer, empathy written all over him. Mrs. Patel wiped her eyes. "Keanu, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was grieving and didn't know how to handle it." Keanu didn't hesitate. He embraced her gently. "You don't owe me an apology," he whispered. "You just miss someone you love." The HOA board looked shaken. This was no longer a policy issue. It was a human story. After a quiet deliberation, the HOA announced its decision. All complaints related to personal cooking aromas would be dismissed permanently, and the board would review its guidelines to ensure cultural sensitivity going forward. But the moment the decision was announced, the neighbors cheered, not because Keanu won, but because humanity won. Chef Armand opened the container, letting the aroma drift through the hall. Mrs. Patel inhaled softly, this time without pain. "It's beautiful," she whispered. And Keanu, humble, gentle, kind, smiled the same soft smile his grandmother used to give him. Outside, the neighbors formed a spontaneous feast on the lawn, everyone sharing dishes from their homes, their histories, their hearts. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Keanu stood quietly near his gate, watching the community laugh and eat together. Not a victory party, a unity party. A reminder that sometimes it only takes one aroma to bring people together. And from that day on, whenever someone walked past Keanu's home and caught the scent of ginger, sesame, and warm herbs drifting into the breeze, they didn't complain. They smiled. Because now, the whole neighborhood understood. The smell wasn't just food, it was love, memory, and home.